Hey, you ever wonder why some teams seem to outperform everyone else while other teams seem to just consistently lag behind, have tons of problems, can never seem to get it together and get along? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you the one thing, like if you install nothing else, this one thing that will absolutely turn your team from wherever they're at into one of the most high performing teams in your organization. Hey, James here, and today we're talking about teamwork, but in fact, a very special segment of teamwork, and it's really about the culture. And if there's one piece of culture that you can get into your team that will absolutely make the difference, it all has to do with a certain way of thinking. It's actually a mindset. And to do that, let's just go back in time a little bit. There was a book that came out quite a while ago now by Carol Dweck, and she was the one that sort of made this more popular and mainstream, but her book was called Mindset, right? The New Psychology of Success. And in that book, she talks about two basically general mindsets, right? There's a growth mindset, which is the mindset that, hey, regardless of where I'm at, I can get better. And then there's the fixed mindset, which is sort of a belief that we're kind of born with what we got. We got our talents, we got our personality. Things don't really change much, and so it's sort of fixed. Well, depending on what mindset you have creates a massive difference in how you live your life, all right? But one of the things that we want to do with our teams, in fact, one of the most powerful things we can do is to install a culture of thinking, and that is of a growth mindset. So let me go to some slides here and show you why. Here's some of the strengths of having a growth mindset. Number one, it makes your team more resilient to challenges, because when we feel like we can improve or that we can change something, we're not going to just be helpless victims. So we're going to have more resilience. Secondly, it's going to increase our motivation. Like when your team thinks that or believes that, hey, I can change this, I can get better at this, they're motivated. Compare that to the belief of, well, I'm not good at this and I'll never be good at this. Well, of course, there's going to be no motivation to change. Number three, continuous improvement, right? When your team has a growth mindset, they're always thinking how we can improve. Number four, you're going to have better collaboration because people aren't so afraid of failing. And so they're not protecting themselves all the time. And lastly, it actually increases your innovation because you change the way you view failure. All right. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to dive into 7 things that you can do to create more of a growth mindset on your team. Okay, so the first one is this: is learn to start praising the process and not only the outcome. Right? As leaders, we're so concerned about the outcome, right? Like, I'll be happy when we get to the top of the mountain. I'll be less stressed when we get to the top of the mountain, right? I'll be less focused and intense when we get to the top of the mountain. Okay, that's great. You got to get to the top of the mountain, but there's a process along the way, and it's the process that gets us there. So we want to learn to praise process. Some people, they don't want to praise process because they think people will let up. That's just not the case. Number 2, you want to encourage and reward risk-taking. Now, this is probably not new to you, but so many leaders know this, but they don't do it. So in other words, they'll tell their team like, hey, we want you guys to take risks. But then somebody takes a risk and they fail, and then the feedback is, what were you thinking? Like, why did you do that? Which is a form of kind of slapping someone's hand, and it's a form of punishment. And then it sends the message, oh, don't take risks. So I get that sometimes when somebody takes a risk and it doesn't work out, there's a problem. And you have to deal with that problem, right? Like, hey, here's why this wasn't good. Here's the consequence. Here's the impact of this mistake. But then we want to separate that. But let me talk a little bit about the risk-taking that went involved with that, because that is something we're trying to do as a team, take more risks. And I appreciate you taking the initiative. I appreciate you taking the risk when you knew that you might fail. And don't let this setback stop you from that kind of thinking. So that would be an example of rewarding risk-taking, right? Even when things don't go well. Number 3, we want to encourage and reward continuous learning, right? So this is something that you want to make as part of the culture of your team. And so you can be asking your team the question, hey, what are you learning? What did you learn this week? What did you learn this month? Or maybe as a group, you're learning together. Maybe you're learning on how to become a better team. And so you're going to get a book on teamwork and you're going to read it together. Or maybe you're just going to have an expectation that everybody is doing something to grow and people can report in. And of course, you as well. Number 4, we want to turn all failures and missteps into lessons. This is such an important piece of a growth mindset, because if a misstep, a mistake, a failure is the end of the world, well, okay, then you got to have some better guardrails in place. But the idea here is that anytime someone makes a mistake, we want to turn that into, well, what did we learn from that, right? Not just what did you learn, but like, okay, what can we learn from that, right, as a team? So let's say somebody is out with a client and they forget to bring something up, or they forget to tell the client about this change that your company's making that's going to impact them, right? And that was a mistake. And so you could ask them like, okay, so what happened? How did that happen? And maybe they say, well, I just forgot. Okay, so what do we learn from this, right? Instead of admonishing somebody about like, well, you just can't forget those things. A better question is, okay, you forgot, so what can we learn from this? And maybe they don't know, and you could pass on that lesson. Well, I think what we've learned is that memory is not the greatest system, right? I can't remember what I had for dinner last night, so I can't expect you to remember everything. So what can we do differently so that that doesn't happen again? What do we need to learn from this? Now, they still may not know, and you're going to tell them to go think about it for a day and then come back tomorrow and fill me in. But let's say they come back and they say, well, you know what, I realize I should probably have a template that I look at just before I end my conversation with a client to make sure I've covered everything. Excellent. That's a great improvement, right? That's some innovation right there, right? Because we turned a mistake into what do we need to learn from that? All right, number 5. This is a really important one, is you want to shift your team's mindset about feedback. So many people are afraid of feedback. I mean, honestly, in our natural state, none of us really like feedback because it's somebody coming to us to tell us that we did something wrong or that we need to do something better. And, cue the ego that's going to put up the walls, especially if the person comes at us hard, right, in sort of an attacking way. But this is one of the things you got to talk about with your team and say, hey, everybody, like, we've got to change how we think about feedback. Feedback, even if the person doesn't quite bring it up correctly, and it may not even be 100% true what they're saying, but what we want to do is we don't want to go into defensive mode to defend our ego. We want to be curious, right? We want to be curious to find out, what do I need to learn, or how can I be better here? Right, so it's like if I come down off a stage, let's say I just do a keynote and I come down off a stage and the meeting planner comes and says, hey, can I give you some feedback on your speech? And I can tell from their tone of voice that there's something they didn't like, right? Immediately, my natural instinct is going to be like, oh, what did I do, right? Like I'm in trouble or something. But a growth mindset is like, okay, hey, yeah, tell me, because I want to get better, right? It's having that outlook towards feedback. There's some humility, obviously, with that, but it actually takes a lot of ego strength to be able to see feedback differently. But that's what we want to do, right? We want our teams, we want to shift how they think about feedback. Number 6, we want to challenge fixed mindset language. We want to challenge fixed mindset language. And so what I mean is, you might hear somebody in a meeting say something like, well, I'm just not good at this, or I'll just never be good at this, or, give it to Sally, like this is her natural strength. And so when people say anything that would point to a belief that they just can't improve in this, you want to call that out and just say, hey, how can we reframe that? And they might say, yeah, but no, this is like, I've tried before, I just can't get this. Hey, maybe it's going to take you longer to get it, but is it true that you just literally could never get this? And help them understand that, no, it's a growth mindset is, if I keep working at something and I keep trying, I will learn and I will get better at the process. All right, and finally, number 7, and that is to model a growth mindset. Model a growth mindset. This is really one of the most important points, because you can teach all this stuff to your staff, but then if you're not modeling it, it's like you just cut your own legs out from under you and you're not going to have a lot of credibility. And so you have to model a growth mindset. Like all those points that we just talked about, you've got to be able to take risks. You've got to be talking about continuous learning and what you're doing. You've got to be able to share your mistakes and missteps and the lessons you're learning, right? You've got to be open to feedback from people, or even share the times where your ego flares up and then you realize it, and then you realize, no, I'm going to have a growth mindset. Like, you have to set the example there. But as you do, I'm telling you, here's the thing about a growth mindset. When you get your team really rallying around this as a culture, now it's not going to happen overnight, by the way, and it's not even going to happen in 1 month. Like, you're going to have to sit with this for 6 months. But when your team starts to embrace a growth mindset, I'm telling you, everything becomes easier. Collaboration is easier. Feedback is easier. There's less fights among your staff. There's less hurt feelings. And accountability becomes so easy. And not only that, those difficult conversations, they aren't so difficult anymore. So, like I said at the beginning, probably the most powerful thing you can do with your team is help everybody embrace a culture of a growth mindset, so that you're always on a path of continuous growth. And it's there that you're going to be able to accomplish amazing things as a team.